Welcome to the April Wealth Advisory Review. Today, we're going to be talking about a few things in the economy and the market. You may have noticed some things have changed recently, and we're going to try to catch you up to speed on what's going on and help make that work well for you and I as we try to manage the wealth matters that are important to each of us when it comes to managing our family wealth wisely. Here we go. All right. So in this review, we're going to take time to talk about the market changes, the economic and geopolitical issues that are facing Americans today, and I guess the world, to be honest, as we try to navigate these changes that are happening right now in our country, in the economy, and in our wealth management and the markets as well. As always, we're going to cover a number of items tonight. My encouragement always is take time to make sure that you think through each process accordingly, that you choose wisely for what is best for your family when it comes to investment management, wealth creation and development, preservation, as well as tax issues and legal issues and so on. So please consult the right people to help you in that discussion. We're certainly here to help anytime we can, but when we're out of our depth, we're very quick to say, let's talk to other experts who can help with this issue. As always, and especially tonight, we'll have time for questions at the end. Please feel free to ask them. There are no unintelligent questions. There's just questions that haven't been asked. So please take time to ask those, and we'll do our very best to answer them for you. Tonight, we're going to talk about clarifying the tariff discussion, the Trump tariff turmoil, the Trump presidencies 1.0 and now 2.0, sector rotation and portfolio management items, wealth management for you and your family, the difference that Frank Reynolds and Company brings to this discussion because we're client-driven and advisor-managed, and your questions, as well as take a moment to look at the next investment or wealth advisory review. So you probably know this, but just in case, I wanted to spend a few moments on just discussing what tariffs are. So what is a tariff? Well, tariffs are taxes imposed by governments on imported goods. They raise the cost of foreign products, making domestic goods more competitive. Tariffs can protect local industries, generate revenue, and influence trade relationships between countries. Who pays the tariff? Well, the importer pays the tariff when goods enter the country. This cost is often passed to consumers through higher prices. While foreign exporters may lose competitiveness, the financial burden of the tariff is ultimately borne by domestic businesses and consumers. And that is mostly true. I might even go as far as to say that is 85% true. The fact is that the shops where we buy these goods, the exporters exporting these goods and so on, they might take part of that burden, at least for the first few years, because they want to stay competitive and make it so that they can keep delivering goods and services. So if a tariff made something cost $100 more, you might find that in the first year, the exporter eats a portion of it, the shopkeeper eats a portion of it, and the consumer does. But over time, it is true that the consumer will ultimately bear the full weight of that. And I would also say that in past, and I've had different workshops on this when we've had conversation about tax increases in the country, and the administration would say things like, we're going to raise taxes on corporations because it's those corporations that should pay the taxes. And they act like that has no impact upon consumers. I would hope from this point forward that everybody understands that if a tariff can raise your taxes, or I'm sorry, if a tariff can raise your cost of goods and your cost of living, then so do corporate taxes, because they operate in the exact same way. If we tax them $100, they might eat up a portion of it the first year, but by the second or third year, the consumer is now paying all that tax. So hopefully, going forward into other discussions that will happen in future years, the next time somebody tells you that corporate taxes are paid by corporations, you'll realize that it's not true any more than it's true that tariffs are paid by exporters. They're all paid by the consumer ultimately. So a tariff, even though we're saying about putting a tariff on China or a tariff on Vietnam or a tariff on Israel, the reality is we're not really putting it on that country. They're not going to pay it. The people who work in those countries and export those goods to our country, they will pay it, and then they will pass it on as soon as they can to consumers. So hopefully that clarifies that point, because it just seems to be just talked about on multiple TV stations and programs in ways that are not accurate. So I want to talk about tariffs a little bit, because in all of the conversations I've seen, very few people have actually talked about this particular point. Matter of fact, I've only seen one person talk about it, and I wanted to spend some time this evening developing it. Normally, we take a lot of time on technical analytics. I'm going to spend some time on technical analytics tonight, but I thought we'd spend some time on the fundamentals to kind of help people understand where we are and how that's going to impact where we go. So first things first, I don't know if you knew it or not, America became the wealthiest nation in the world by 1913 using tariffs with no federal income tax to U.S. citizens. None. Only tariffs. That's really important to understand. From, and you'll see here in a moment, I believe it's 1816 to 1913, we became the wealthiest nation in the world using tariffs, didn't have any income taxes on U.S. citizens. And that's, to me, a bit issue, and I want to share a little bit of that with you. So from Douglas Irwin's Clashing Over Commerce, you see a chart here that identifies how tariffs in the U.S. started in 1816. They may have been some other tariffs along the way, I'm not suggesting, but how he starts in this book, 1816, and you'll notice it's at 25%, right here, 25%. And then they went up to 45% by 1828. Then they came down to 40% by 1861. Then they went up to roughly 53% by 1897. And then by 1913, which is going to be an important date here in a second, they dropped back down to 25%. And they have not fully disappeared. We've been using tariffs, but they have been largely disappeared since that time. And so I want you to understand what that means exactly. That during that time, the United States of America, for just a little less than 100 years, went from what I'm about to show you to the wealthiest nation on the planet using tariffs. Now, this is from an organization called Keeson Stats, and Keeson put together information on, throughout history, who the wealthiest nations have been by GDP. And so you can see at the very top here is it's pronounced Qing. I checked that out. It is the Qing dynasty, which is actually the forerunner to China. In 1816, the Qing dynasty, or what's to become future China in 1912, is the wealthiest nation by GDP in the world. And the East India Company is the second. And you might say, well, how did they do that? Well, because you've heard of trading of spices and trading of goods and animals and so on. There were a lot of trade that was happening from that region of the world to the rest of the world, and that's how they became wealthy. And then you'll notice all the way down the list here, you got United Kingdom is number 3 at that point. United States down here, what is that, like 9 or 10? We're a paltry, wealthy, unwealthy nation compared to the Qing dynasty, the East India Company. And then, again, you notice this date, 1816, we started charging tariffs for the goods that we transferred out. And so what happens is from 1816 to 1913, we become the wealthiest nation, richest country by GDP in the world. Number 2 is the United Kingdom. Number 3 is China, the Republic of China, which until 1912 was called the Qing Dynasty, but in 1912 becomes the Republic of China, and that's who you're seeing there. So tariffs actually became the tool that America used to become wealthy, prosperous, and the powerhouse that we know today. Now, I show you this because I think this is incredibly important, because when I listen to most media outlets talk about tariffs, they make it sound like it's terrible, and it's never worked, and it's a bad idea, and all it does is causes problems. This data clearly shows that's not true. Now, whether or not that means it works today is still another issue, which we'll get to here in a minute. But for the moment, what I'd suggest to you is tariffs have not been a bad thing. They have been a thing that our country has used to build wealth. And had we not done that from 1816 to 1913, I don't think we would be in the financial position we're in today. Whether you think we're in a good position or not, we wouldn't be in that position if it was not for all the wealth we created as a nation through tariffs, passing on revenue or fees or taxes to people who wanted to purchase our goods or who wanted us to purchase their goods. So now the reason 1913 is important, and I said to you a moment ago that we did that without having any federal income tax. In 1913, Woodrow Wilson, his administration, decided that we should have a federal income tax. We had actually had a federal income tax under Abraham Lincoln. It was the last year of his administration prior to his death, and Congress had voted into a federal income tax so they could pay for the war. The war ended, and so they never implemented that tax. And so from that time until 1913, we still did not have a federal income tax. But the Woodrow Wilson administration said, we need a federal income tax. We need to tax the citizens of the United States of America. And I've talked about this in previous videos. I'm not going to go into it tonight because of timing, but I will just tell you that they told us that 1% on people making $20,000, which was a big amount of money back in 1913, that's what they'd have to pay, and 7% up to 500,000, I think. Didn't look that number up prior to this, but it's a pretty significant number. And they told us that'll be the last tax we'll ever need to charge. That'll take care of everything from this point forward. Totally pay the bills of the United States of America. And as you can tell on this little chart right here, wrong way. That worked. That worked for 3 years. And then they said, oh, we made a mistake. We just got to double it. So they doubled it. And then they said, oh, we made a mistake. And they took it all the way up to the top tax bracket now being about 67%. And then they said, oh, we miscalculated again. It needs to be 73%. And then they brought it down, went through the Great Depression, then brought it up 63%, 78%, 94%. And for over a decade, it was above 91% was the top tax bracket. Now, this is going from a nation that is the wealthiest by GDP in the world, getting paid by other nations, what we're going to call the External Revenue Service, to the Internal Revenue Service charging its citizens. And with that in mind, while it has continued to work and we still continue to function, and our nation has done some amazing things, the reality is that it's costly. As a matter of fact, if I put that into perspective, suppose that you have an IRA, an individual retirement account, a 401k, whatever it is that you have for your retirement account that grows tax deferred, that you don't pay taxes on. And suppose you get your statement out, it says it's worth $1 million. And you look at that statement, you're like, look here, I've got $1 million. The problem is the IRS does not agree with you. Because if you are at the current top tax rate of 37%, the IRS says, no. $630,000 of that million is yours. $370,000 of it is the IRS's. And that's really important to understand. The IRS knows that $370,000 of your IRA money is their money, even though they didn't contribute a dime to it, because they have to pay the bills of our country, because we now tax through IRS, Internal Revenue Service, rather than ERS, External Revenue Service. We do have tariffs, no doubt, even before President Trump said that. And even if you go back and check, many people before, Republican leaders, Democrat leaders, talked about reciprocal taxes. There are videos out there of Nancy Pelosi, of Chuck Schumer, of Mitch McConnell, of George Bush. They're all talking about how we need to have this. But President Trump decided to implement it. We'll talk about in a moment whether that's wise or not. But to that point, and to this point here, the fact that your $1 million IRA is not yours is indeed thanks to 1913, when the Wilson administration said we need to have an income tax in America. And all of the other politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, followed along. One other thing to note on this chart is this line right here. If you take all these highs and these lows and you average them out, it turns out that the top tax rate in our country has been, the top tax bracket, 56.58%. So we're actually enjoying about a 20% reduction in tax compared to the high average. And I appreciate that greatly, but with debt in the nation being like it is, that's a little concerning, I think, whether or not we can stay at 37% or whether or not we might have to increase the tax rate for the IRS if we don't have a plan to do something with the ERS. Now, to be sure, I want to express, I'm not saying that I think the tariffs are perfect, are safe, are a great plan. I'm not sure any more than most people are right now whether or not it is or not. I think it is, but I don't know that. And so, like you, I'm watching carefully what this means. But for the purpose of what I'm showing you with these first few slides, is just simply to say, you need to think about the fact that we have a generation or two or three or more down the road that we want to make sure they have the same country and the same opportunities we have. And we might have to ask ourselves, are the strategies we're using today the best strategies for how we go forward? And will they make it so that if we're here for another 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to be happy with how it looks? And so that's part of why I'm taking time to look at the fundamentals of what's happening right now, both in the economy, geopolitically, and the markets as well. So now to 2025. Hey, you know what? We're still the wealthiest nation in the world by GDP. But you can see that China is catching up. In that previous slide, they were less than half of where we are. Today, they're about 2/3 to where we are now. They're catching up. And you know what? I'm not opposed to any nation catching up and surpassing the United States if they do a good job. But if it's happening because we're having poor management problems, or we're not thinking clearly how to handle our own finances well, how to manage our own financial house well, that does bother me. And you'll note that United Kingdom is now down here about 6. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why I've even pointing out the United Kingdom, because I think it's an important thing as we look at some of the items that are happening right now in the world. So while we're still up there, yay, I want to make sure we stay there for a long time to come, for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren as well. Now, in the face of that, we have a challenge. Now, this is the U.S. debt clock. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. Most people I ask, have you seen it? They say they have. I don't know if you ever go take a look at that site. I'm going to actually take you to that site so you can see it happening right now. So this is the U.S. debt clock, and it's got a lot of information on here. First thing to look at is this is the U.S. national debt. We are right on the verge of $37 trillion of debt. And I want to point out that we're not only seeing that debt climb, which is terrifying by itself. It's over 100% of our GDP now. But the other part of the problem is that we're spending more as a nation than we make. And so consequently, we're spending more than we make. So we're increasing the debt that way. Plus we have interest on this debt that is increasing this debt as well. At what point does this house of cards collapse? I don't know. Maybe we could be at 60 trillion in debt and we'd still be fine. Maybe it's 120 trillion. Maybe 40 trillion is where it falls apart. I don't know, but I do know that we have to do something to change this. And whether or not the policies that President Trump are putting forth are the right ones or not, we're going to find out. But I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes to tell you my opinion on what's going on. But nevertheless, whether that is the right strategy or not, some strategy has to be put in place to fix this problem right here. When we also look at, and you may notice this is a new thing put in this last year, the Doge clock, which identifies how much in savings the Doge team has pulled together so far. And it's $295 billion. Now, that's a long ways. I mean, we need to reduce our spending by about $2 trillion. So that's a long ways away from that. It's basically about an eighth of it, but it's a good start. And we need to not only find those areas of waste or abuse or fraud, but we also have to put in place policies that stop it from continuing on or happening again. And so this clock, which is terrifying to watch for a few minutes, really reminds you that we have to do something to get our financial house in order as well. And President Trump's answer right now is to use tariffs, which is not his only answer, but it is certainly one of the answers, which we'll come back to in a minute. Again, you can find this at usdebtclock.org. I would encourage you at least take a look at it one time and maybe show it to some other people, because I don't know that everybody understands what's happening here. All right, let's continue on. So now the same group, Keyson Stats, they've taken the information and extrapolated it into the future, projecting what they believe would happen if everything stays as it currently is. There's no guarantees that this is the numbers that we would see, but it is interesting. You'll notice that at the top now is China at $101 trillion. That's a big chunk of money. I'm actually thinking, is that 101 trillion? I think so. Yep, I'm pretty sure. It might actually be, what would be next? I don't know, quadrillion. But the point is that that's a lot of money. And here's the US, right here at 51, half of what China is. And interestingly, here's India. Now, you may remember, if I go back to 1816, it was the Qing dynasty, China, and India that were at the top. And here we are circling back a little over a couple hundred years, a little over a few centuries, and India is back up there. Why? Because they have cheap labor, and corporations are looking for cheap labor because it's always about making money. Now, don't misunderstand. I like making money. I think you like making money. We want to make money, but we don't want to make money to the point where it hurts us, meaning that if we take all of our manufacturing and put it in other countries because they have cheap labor, what happens if we run into something like, oh, I don't know, a pandemic, where we can't get our own medicine, where we can't get our own health items, where we can't get semiconductors because we don't manufacture them anymore. We don't get steel because we don't manufacture it anymore. Where do we get these things from? And so that's part of what this is about as well. As I go into more on tariffs, it will make sense about that. But if this chart's right, then China's at the top, United States is third, United Kingdom's down here around, I don't know, 10, 11. Something else that would happen on this chart right now, oil, for the most part, is purchased in US dollars. It's called the currency reserve, the reserve currency status of the world, meaning that the dollar is the standard for all purchases around the world. You can take a dollar and go almost any place and buy something with it. You can't do that with other currencies. If we fall to third, there's a good chance that we lose the reserve currency status. And if we lose the reserve currency status, what does that mean? It could cost us literally billions and billions of dollars, because if we're not the standard anymore and say the yuan is the standard, then what does that mean for our nation? And the question becomes, how long do we have to change this? If this is the outcome we're headed for, what do we do next? And if we're going through some sort of a reset right now, which we may or may not, we'll talk about that in a minute. I think that if I thought that was going to change this, I think I'd be willing to endure a little bit more of that. Now, the big question is going to be, are we going through that, or is something else happening, which is part of what I want to talk about. Now, I want to check here. I thought I saw a hand go up. Maybe I didn't. Just see here if there's a chat. Nope. Okay. All right. So let's keep going here. Okay. So I started with this first statement. By 1913, America had become the wealthiest nation in the world, while having no federal income taxes and only using tariffs. Number two, tariffs historically have been utilized for income protection or both. Now, under Donald Trump, the Trump administration utilizes them as a negotiation tool as well. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But first, let's look at number three, protection. Critical manufacturing of medicine, semiconductors, and other crucial items important to our national security are manufactured by foreign companies. This could be dangerous for our nation during critical times such as war, pandemics, and financial distress. Tariffs are being used to help with this. Now, I just talked with somebody today who said that they think that his goal is to bring all manufacturing back to the U.S. I don't think so. I don't think that would be intelligent. I think there's a lot of manufacturing that could stay outside the United States and still be fruitful and beneficial to that nation and to us as well. But there are key things that are critical: medicine, semiconductors, which go into everything, certain equipment used for military conflict, certain issues for financial institutions and so on, certain electronics and artificial intelligence, etc. Those items need to be housed in a place where we know they're safe. We know they're ours and we know we're protected. But that doesn't mean we have to have everything moved back to the US. I've also talked to people who tell me, well, there's just no way to tool up fast enough to get all this manufacturing back here. No, that's silly, because we have car companies now. And one of the things that President Trump has said is that if you manufactured here, there'd be no tariffs. And we have car companies that are foreign companies that have manufacturing plants in the US, and they're just ramping those up. They're adding more workers. They're increasing the size of the plant. So they're not building from scratch. They're just increasing what they currently have. And that, truthfully, could help a lot. So the reality is that not bringing everything back here, but bringing the critical infrastructure items back here may be essential to where we are a decade, two, or more down the road. Number two, income. So tariffs have been used for protection. Now they're being used for income, or they have been used for income. With almost $37 trillion in U.S. liabilities, the U.S. needs additional financial resources to cover our annual budget and pay off our national debt. Yes, DOGE is going to help us find savings. And I think that's fantastic. And hopefully those savings will lock in because Congress will do their job and they'll put in spending controls and we'll have a balanced budget and things will work like they should, which would be fantastic. But at the same time, we still have this $37 trillion debt. And if tariffs could bring in income from the External Revenue Service, that might make it so we could pay off that debt faster. It might also make it so that we could lower the taxes to U.S. citizens, the IRS. Trump has floated a couple of times that he would like to see those who make $150,000 or less not pay taxes. He's floated the idea of senior citizens not paying taxes on Social Security. He's floated several ideas that the tax code would have to be changed to make that happen. But how do you cut those taxes when you have no other income source to offset them with? And so having a good balance between an ERS and an IRS could be essential to making this happen. And doing so, and we'll talk about the dangers of it, without destroying our economies and other economies around the world simultaneously, is a difficult maneuver. And we're going to have to decide if we feel confident that he and his team have the ability to do so. But that brings me to the third point, negotiation. President Trump, in his first presidency, President Trump administration 1.0, utilized tariffs to effectively negotiate foreign trade imbalances during his first presidency, and hopefully he'll have similar results this time as well. And that's really important, is that if he can make it so that we have a good balance of trade, a fair balance of trade, then in reality, we could not only have good income to pay our bills, we could have better protection for our nation, and we could have better relationships with other countries that we work with. So those are the three pieces: protection, income, and negotiation tools he's looking at using to bring this piece of the discussion together. So now let's take a look at the Trump tariff turmoil and the Trump presidency 2.0. And I'm calling it the Trump tariff turmoil because it is fair that it has been a fair amount of turmoil, that you cannot turn on the news right now without having to hear, depending on where you get your news from or who you listen to or what they're talking about, how this whole stock market thing and the whole fearfulness in the economy and the whole uncertainty right now, it's President Trump's fault. And I'm just going to call it the Trump tariff turmoil until we figure out what's really happening here. So if we look at that, probably the best way to look at that is to go back to the Trump presidency 1.0. And, you know, it seems like it's a decade ago. It seems like it's just forever ago that we had him as president, President 45. Now he's 47. But I went back and pulled up the data on the S&P 500, and this chart I think is very interesting. From the beginning of his presidency to the end of his presidency, roughly about 6 months out, the S&P 500 went up 87%. That's not quite doubling, but it went up almost 87%. So if you had If you had $100,000, you had $187,000 if you were fully invested in the S&P 500 only. But that's what that was, 87%. And that is amazing. Not every presidency can say that's what's happened with the S&P 500. Some have done well. I'm not suggesting that nobody's done well. They all do. They all have had good years and bad years. But for the Trump presidency, 87% is not bad in his first time around. But that's not really my focal point here. My real focal point is next. Because during those 4 years, he had corrections and bear markets. As a matter of fact, he had a correction in 2018, and a correction means it dropped 10% or more. And he had another correction in 2020. Again, another that's 10% downturn. And then he had 2 bear markets, which is 20% or more. He had one there in 2018 to 2019, and then he had another one when the pandemic hit in early 2020. So even though we had all that upside in the market, he went through 2 10% corrections and 2 20% bear markets, 20% or more bear markets. And yet he still had the growth with all that happening. Now, let's add a little bit more to this. Those corrections and those bear markets lasted 6 months, and 3 of them were 6 months, and one of them was 10 weeks. And so I think there's this point that even with what we're going through today, and trust me, I feel it too, it's like, will this ever end? It'll never end. It's so terrible. Will it ever go away? And yet, during this time, he actually saw 2 corrections, 2 bear markets lasting no more than 6 months on any one of them, 10 weeks on another, and still had a great year presidency term end for performance in the S&P 500. Now, not only that, but this particular time right here was created by tariffs 1.0. When President Trump in March of 2018 decided to go full-blown tariff battle with China, and he raised their tariffs 25%. He renegotiated the Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And so he was full on in that battle. He did not take it worldwide because time just didn't. There were various reasons, and we could talk about that. I think he wanted to, but he didn't. But he did that during that time, and we still had the correction, the bear market, the 6 months time frame twice, and we still saw the growth by the end. And that includes coming through a pandemic, a worst pandemic in 100 years. Now, the reason I pointed the pandemic for just a second is, you know as well as I do, the cost of living went up. We had goods that we couldn't get, and so the cost of living went up because of that. We had things we had to deal with, cost of living we couldn't get to. I don't know that we're going to experience anything worse, and not that I'm saying that I want this to happen, but I don't know if we're going to experience anything worse than that. I mean, I can remember not being able to find toilet paper at the grocery store. I can remember certain foods I wanted. I couldn't find them anymore. And when I did find them, they had gone up in price. I don't know that we're not going to experience that. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's going to be that bad, but I recognize this is a risky move that he's doing. And so it might be that bad. I can tell you that when I get to the technicals, I'm hearing things from, it's just going to be a mild correction. Maybe it's honestly a good chance to buy, and you're going to see another growth period happen. Although I'll hear the other end of the spectrum, completely other end, which is we're headed for a Great Depression. We'll talk about some of that in the technicals in a second. But this is what we saw when he was president last time. And what I would suggest is that President Trump, right here, this man is a disruptor, and therefore he generates economic and market volatility. When making investment decisions, investors have a choice: follow his policies or follow the turmoil created by his policy decisions. And what I mean by that is, if you decide that his policies are going to lead us to where we want to be as a nation in this world, then we'll deal with the issues we're facing step by step. On the other hand, if we just can't live with it, if we just can't stand it, then we just get on the sidelines and just stay out of it until something else is figured out. Either one's fine. I'm just the wealth advisor here. I'll give you my opinions and we'll help make right choices for you based on what you tell us. But from a fundamental viewpoint, we have to make a decision that if these tariffs have the chance to make this nation better than it has been, then we need to work through that process. On the other hand, if we don't think the tariffs are a good choice, then what we need to do is we need to say, okay, we're going to just choose things that are defensive and stay out of this until we can see how the dust settles. Both have benefit. We'll just figure out which one has the most growth potential when it's all said and done, which brings me to this thought up here. There are no guarantees that the outcome of the second Trump presidency will compare favorably with the first Trump presidency. I know that. You know that. But we need to make a decision based upon our personal and family values, needs, and goals as we do that. And we're all in different places. Some of you are quite a ways away from retirement, so you got time. You can let this work itself out. Some of you are right on retirement. You've got to make decisions right away. You want to stay on top of this, but at the same time, you kind of like what you see, even though you don't like the market turmoil. Some of you are already retired, and you're trying to figure out, can I survive this? What do I need to do? How do I make sure that I have enough to last me as long as I do? So these are points that we're going to have to work through. And this is where we start to move into sort of technical analytics and understanding what's really going on. But I want to spend the first part of tonight's discussion helping you to understand that tariffs are not terrible. They may or may not fit in today's world, although I will tell you, I think they do. I think that they are a perfect place to start changing, resetting some of the way the world and the United States interact. And I think they will help set up something for our children and our grandchildren that may not be there if we don't do something different. And if tariffs aren't the right solution, I'm pretty confident that President Trump and his team are ready to make other choices too, because I think ultimately what he wants to do is to create that Make America Great Again process, put it in place, lock it in. So now let's clarify some things about President Trump and what he's doing. First off, it's not just President Trump that believes tariffs are essential for making America great again. His U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is 100% behind the plan. Now, the reason I say that is because, and again, I don't know where you get your news or what you follow or something, but there are videos on YouTube you can go find of President Trump, long before he's President Trump, talking to Larry King 40 and 50 years ago, talking about how tariffs need to be the way that the U.S. gets its financial house in order, talking about how tariffs can help us keep manufacturing in America and how shipping all these jobs away to other nations is not our best choice for the long-term strength, health, and financial growth of the United States of America. So he had this in mind a long time, and he said it multiple times during his campaign. So anybody who didn't think he was going to do it really just thought he was another one of those politicians who says one thing and does something different, and he's not. But I'll tell you, it's not just him. His team is behind this, whether it's Peter Navarro or Scott Bessent or many others that work with him. They see this as a way to get this done. Now, you'll notice I focus on Scott, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, for a particular reason. I want to share this with you. He advocates for a 3-3-3 policy framework to cut the budget deficit to 3% of GDP, to achieve a 3% GDP growth through deregulation, and to increase daily oil production by 3 million barrels, which seems very doable to me. Seems like not a crazy far out plan. And that, along with the tariffs, he believes will help bring that about. Bessent's collaboration with President Trump is rooted in their mutual commitment to policies they believe will strengthen the U.S. economy, promote balanced trade, and enhance the nation's global economic standing. And I could have told you that and just left it at that, but I decided I was going to share the fourth point with you because I know several of you are pretty astute when it comes to politics and tracking information and so on, so I didn't want to leave this out and have you call me out on it later like I was trying to hide it. Also, I think it kind of speaks highly to maybe who Scott Bessent is. Scott Bessent played a significant role in George Soros' strategy leading to the devaluation of the British pound on Black Wednesday, September 16th, 1992. Now, for some of you, George Soros he's like the devil incarnate. You realize he has a real bent. Matter of fact, his son also had the same route on destroying conservative ideals, working against certain things that many conservatives would believe to be important, certain things that many MAGA would believe to be important. And George Soros stands squarely against that in many, many ways. If you don't know who he is, maybe do a little research just so you would know. And Scott Bessent worked for him. And not only did Scott Bessent work for him, he was instrumental in Black Wednesday in London. As it goes on here, at that time, Besant was a key member of the Soros Fund Management and headed its London office. He was instrumental in the firm's decision to short the pound, contributing to profits exceeding $1 billion for the fund. This action, while legal, is seen as profiting from economic instability. So Scott Bessent, the same guy who is President Trump's Secretary of Treasury, basically just, struck a blow to the British financial system by shorting the British pound and causing all kinds of havoc that year for them. To their point, they made $1 billion doing it, but he was instrumental in leading that process. So there's two ways to look at it. This guy's Darth Vader, or he's brilliant, or maybe he's both. But he's in President Trump's team now. And so the question is, what does that mean to you and I? And that's why I wanted to drill down on that for a second. So when I found this information out, I really started doing some digging into who Scott Bessent is. And there's two ways to look at this guy. You can look at him as concern or criticism about him, which would be things like he helped George Soros short the British pound, which was, it's terrible. If somebody shorted the US dollar and created a huge amount of economic instability in the United States of America, we'd hate that person. We would we would not be happy about that. We would be furious. And so to know that he did that to one of our allies, United Kingdom, that's pretty serious. And that George Soros sanctioned that, and Scott Bessent helped him get it done. They profited from a move that destabilized the national currency. His close ties to Soros, a liberal mega donor and conservative target, he's viewed by some as a globalist due to hedge fund background, meaning Scott Bessent. Worries about prioritizing financial gains over national interest, and some items regarding his ideological inconsistency or consistency, I guess, whether he's changed or not. On the other hand, though, reasons to trust him. He's now working for Trump, chosen by Trump to execute America First policies. He's using market expertise to build U.S. economic strength, the same insight that he used to destabilize the British pound. He now knows how to use that to strengthen the U.S. dollar. Maybe he has shifted his focus to advancing conservative goals like deregulation and tariffs, which is what he says he's doing. He advocates for the 3-3-3 plan that I told you about, the GDP growth, deficit reduction, and energy independence. And he's backing tariff leverage, domestic oil, and tough on China policies. And he's praised by Trump for being results-driven and tough on the Fed. So now, the thing about him that I sort of look at, and I'm going to give you a resource so you can do your own research about him as well, is so President Trump has a very important challenge facing him, the midterm elections, less than 2 years away now. And if we lose the House or the Senate, he's going to be looking at impeachment 3.0 and 4.0 probably. He probably won't get anything accomplished that he wants to, just like he struggled in the second term to get some of the things done that he wanted, or the first term to get things done that he wanted to do. So he knows he is on borrowed time to get everything finished. And so he is working very hard, I believe, to make sure that he doesn't get cut off at the knees in the midterm elections. And that means he has to be showing people that his policies are working and that things are turning around, and that not only is Wall Street experiencing growth, but so is Main Street, and so is your street. And so he, I believe, is working diligently to get that done, because I don't think he wants to fail at what you're doing, what we're doing, what he's doing. So for him to choose Scott Bessent must mean that he has decided that he's going to place a big part of what he's doing in the hands of this man to help bring it about. President Trump will do his part, but he also needs a U.S. Treasury Secretary who can do his part as well. To that point, I remind you that President Trump has brought a number of people into his cabinet that really were Democrats before. RFK Jr., seriously a Democrat. Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat. Elon Musk, Democrat. Scott Bessent, don't know what his politics were particularly, but I would assume probably Democrat. And to be fair, President Trump himself was a Democrat. I mean, it's kind of funny in a way that the Republican Party now being led by Democrats, but I think it's more because their party left them and they decided the conservative ideals, make America great again, economic stability are critical, and they couldn't get that in the party they were in, so they chose to move to a party that was welcoming that and seeking it. So what I would say to you is that I believe that President Trump is incredibly serious, just laser focused on fixing this economy and making things better going forward. I think that he's putting people around him who will make that happen. And to that point, I'm going to share with you a thing that you can look at. I've listened to Scott Bessent on many interviews he's done. And in many of them, he's just sort of bobbing and weaving, answering questions, trying to get things done because he's talking to people who really don't like President Trump and are trying to catch him in something they can use against him or President Trump. This interview here, which you can find on YouTube for free, is Tucker Carlson interviewing him. It's about an hour long, and it really gives you a good understanding of who this guy is and what's driving him. I think the guy in 1992 who engineered what happened with the British pound has changed a lot. And he explains part of the reasoning. I think he doesn't explain exactly the details of it, but you can sense as he's talking some pieces of that. So I would encourage you, just find this on YouTube, watch it for the hour. And I would say two things will happen. Well, assuming that you decide, like I have, that this guy is the real deal. The other thing that'll happen is you'll recognize they actually have a plan, a real plan, a serious plan. It's not just about tariffs only. It's about much more than tariffs. And I think you'll find that what Scott Bessent, as well as others, are doing is designed to make that happen, to bring that about. All right. So now, Trump presidency 2.0. I've readjusted the arrows. I've made it so that everything's kind of back to what it was before because we don't know really what's happening right now. As I said before, if we look at the analytics of what's going on right now, matter of fact, I have to tell you, when I was putting together the Wealth Advisor review for this month, until just a day or so ago, I couldn't figure out what to talk about because the fact is, if I look at the technicals, they're just all over the place. And I said it before, we follow a number of people for both technical and fundamental information. Some of them are convinced we're about to go into the next depression. Some of them are convinced we're going to see another great recession like 2008. Some of them are convinced it's a great buying opportunity. And then there's a myriad of other answers in between. So I really couldn't come to you and say, definitively, this is what I think we're doing right now. We're watching like everybody else is. But what I can tell you at this point in time, and every day reveals new information, every week, every month reveals new information. That's what we're watching for. But I would have to say that when I look at the current economy that President Trump has to work with, outside of the havoc created by this whole tariff turmoil, we have strong profit margins still. And there was no reason, as Conrad de Quadros says, we had no reason to expect recession in 2025. And maybe these tariffs will create part of that discussion. But at this point, everything seems strong regarding corporate profits. When we look at the U.S. Federal Reserve's target rate on Fed funds, still reasonable to work with, 4.25 to 4.5%. 10-year treasuries are reasonable. They kind of bumped up a little bit here recently because of everybody trying to buy into them. But again, not anything great yet, and we think they're going to come down as far as the rate goes. March 25, unemployment. We produced 228,000 jobs last Friday at least that's what they told us for the month of March. It's fantastic. That's not recessionary type job production. Fundamentally, the U.S. economy currently remains strong and could be strengthened in the long term by an efficacious deployment of the Trump tariff policies 2.0. Technically, the U.S. stock market may experience volatility and short-term drawdowns from the uncertainty created by the same Trump administration and tariffs 2.0. And so that's what we're watching here, is to see, is this a correction? Is it a bear market? Is it a full market reset like the Great Depression or the Great Recession? And all that information is hanging out there waiting for us to have enough time to be able to gather it together. Let me do it this way with you. Rather than looking at this slide, I'm going to actually go to the live. So first things first, the fear and greed index right now, it's extreme fear right now. And I understand that. I don't want to make light about it, but there is just a lot of fearfulness out there. All you have to do is watch any of the newscasts, podcasts, anybody talking about technical trading, talking about markets. It's just, there's a lot of discomfort. And so there's extreme fear. Previous was 4, that's where we are today. a week ago was 15 on the score. 17 was about a month ago. 64 was a year ago. So we're over in here. So people were feeling much better back then than they are now. That's a problem. It definitely is an issue. If you're ever interested, we might actually spend some time on talking about this in a future one, but normally it's not where I go for that discussion. What I normally go to is right here. And this is looking at the S&P 500, looking at the last 6 months. And you can see here from the high that we had before in February 19th to the low we're at, it looked like we had formed a bottom here. I thought we had, went up, hit the 200-day moving average. That's what this red line is. Turned around, headed south. Then President Trump shared his thoughts on the tariffs. And here's what we've seen recently. And to be fair, the market is just trying to assess this. The economy, trying to figure out what is this going to look like? What is China going to do? What are other nations going to do? You may have heard, I read today that the Trump administration says that roughly 50 countries have approached them saying, we'd like to renegotiate our trade policy with you to make it so that it's far more functional. And some of them talking zero tariffs. You also have China who pushed back and said, we're going to increase your tariff, and Trump, your tariff rates. And Trump came back and said, if you do, this is what's going to happen. And so we'll see. But to be fair, that's what happened last time around. China raised their tariff rates. President Trump did his as well. We survived. And to that point, I'm going to just share with you one other thing. Oh, goodness gracious. I thought I had it open here. Well, let me do it here. So if we look at, there we go. So the Shanghai Stock Index. So this is their index. This is China's. You could also look at the Hong Kong as well, but they're both the same. They have dropped below their 200-day moving average as well, because their nation is just as concerned about this fight as any. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of data that shows that China is going through a lot of financial problems. The reason we don't see it quite so much is because they're more centralized in how they handle things. The government gives businesses loans. The government gives loans to people. The government controls a lot of different pieces that the United States doesn't do. And so consequently, they can hide some of this turmoil better than what a free nation can. Having said that, though, their stock market is in a free fall as well and is very concerned about what's happening also, which to that point, I've heard said by multiple people, in a trade war like this, the United States is in the best position, meaning that it hurts others more than it hurts us for this trade war to happen. And while it would hurt us, it would hurt others more. And so that's every reason in the world for them to decide to work with us and to move forward intelligently. Having said that, it doesn't change the fact that we're feeling that pain and that fear here. But I would say that we're only 4 days into this now. It's going to take a little bit of time. But I think over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to find out how many nations actually came to the table and said, hey, we want to renegotiate. We got a plan here. We'll work with you. And who stands up and says, we're fighting. If it's a European Union, Macron says, we're going to fight, and then turns around and says something different. We'll see. We'll see. The next few weeks are going to show us a lot. One of the things that we watch carefully, this is the VIX. The VIX is a measurement of volatility on the Chicago Board of Exchange. The VVIX is a measurement of volatility on the VIX. And so if I pulled back and showed you, you could see that it's been a pretty good indicator of the volatility that we have coming. So when the VVIX, the orange line, is much higher than the VIX, it means we got a lot more volatility coming. Another way to kind of see this is if we just make so the VIX is a straight line, you can see that we are probably going to experience some more volatility. I probably didn't have to tell you that. You probably already knew that. I'm just telling you the data supports that we are, but don't let it worry you because we're expecting it. And what we'll do is make decisions along the way because we're proactive wherever we can be. And we're looking for opportunities like whether the US dollar is going down. So that might be an investment opportunity. Whether precious metals are going up, that might be another opportunity. They pulled back quite a bit. That might be an opportunity. We're looking for opportunities to be proactive wherever possible. And then reactive, if things go south in a really bad way, which you've heard me talk about this before, how we handled the pandemic, how we handled 2022, how we handled 2008. We're here doing that same thing again this time as well. And then finally, if we look at the sectors, and this is looking for the last 5 days, you can see that some of the sectors have done well. We can see that, for instance, staples continue to do well. We can see, and these are all defensive kind of positions. Where are you up there? There we go. Healthcare is doing well. Utilities, Real estate, although real estate's kind of turned down a bit, surprising, didn't think it would do so well, to be honest, but has discretionary, actually has been up a bit. I think people are, they can't help themselves a bit sometimes, but I don't expect that to be a great defensive position. Communication services, these are all areas in the last 5 days that have held their own against the S&P 500. I think that depending on how this late term cycle goes, we'll be able to choose how to get more defensive or more aggressive, depending on what comes out of this, which is instead of trying to predict what's going to happen, being patient and reacting appropriately when the information shows itself. I can talk to you about the portfolio management allocations we're doing right now, but truth is we're way more in cash right now, and we're holding positions. We haven't really sold out of a lot, but we sold out of some things that we felt like they might be problematic on. So we did that, and we're really now looking for what's our next best opportunities. And so many of you, quite honestly, have put more money in recently, and we're more in a cash position looking for whether they are high income generating assets, defensive positions, or growth positions. And we'll talk more about that in next month's, or if something comes up, we have to do it sooner, I'll be happy to do that. Nothing has changed from our side. We're still doing 3D trading, thinking in terms of fundamental analytics, which is a lot of what I talked about tonight. Technical analytics, based on what we see happening, on the daily, the weekly, the monthly, against moving averages and other indicators. And then finally, behavioral analytics, which has a lot to do with really what's happening in the short-term reactions and the long-term posturing. We still continue to utilize multiple assets. Nothing's changed there. And as always, as I tell you every time, we seek to be client-driven, meaning we want to find out what's important to you, but we manage it from our side to make sure you get the results you need for your situation. Again, 3 phases of your financial journey. None of this has changed. The fact is, whether the tariffs work or the tariffs don't work, whether different policies work or new things change, whether the economy takes off and roars for the next 5 years, or we have to go through a volatility. I've taken to calling it, it's kind of like, a bull market. And the reason I call it a bull market is because when a bull attacks, he goes down and goes up. And when a bear attacks, he raises up and goes down. And so this is neither bull nor bear right now. Well, I mean, it feels more like it's bear than anything else. But I think it could just be kangaroo for a while. It's just going to keep bouncing around until it finds its balance. And then we'll be able to see some of that. Every day, more information helps us understand what we're looking for and what we need to do next. Your financial dashboard, please refer to it regularly so that way you can see what's happening. If you have questions, we're here to help you think through it and to implement the right strategies for that. So please utilize that for your benefit. Certainly our 4 applications plus several others you don't see on this dashboard are available to help you and your family manage wealth wisely. I'm going to stop for a few minutes and questions here. Our next wealth advisory review is going to be May 13th. Unless something really dramatic happens. If something dramatic or catastrophic happens, we'll have an emergency one. But assuming that it doesn't, we're going to go ahead and plan for May 13th. I see your hand in news. I'll get to it in just a second, man. Okay, so we talked about clarifying the tariff discussion, the Trump tariff turmoil, Trump presidencies 1.0, 2.0, talked about how we're managing wealth using sector rotation, portfolio management, client-driven, advisor-managed thinking. And so hopefully that kind of answers that. And I'm not meaning to speed through everything, but some of this stuff you've seen multiple times, and I don't want to slow you down with it. So now let me go over here. If you want to hear me talk about other items, please feel free, email. We do this every Tuesday, the second Tuesday of the month. So every second Tuesday, you get an invitation to come here. So just email ahead of time, say, hey, would you just talk about this item? I'd like to know what you're thinking about this. I'm happy to do that as well. So for now, I'm going to go home, have dinner with Jane, and rest for the evening. So hopefully this has been good for you. I feel like it's been good, and I enjoyed doing it for you. And I'll look forward to continuing this with you in our next conversation, whether it's in the office, on the phone, or in another webinar. So have a wonderful evening, and I will look forward to talking to y'all soon. Bye-bye.